Kia ora everyone. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us again. Nice to see you all here. I'm going to start off our session today by calling in the positive energies for our hui with a karakia. Tūtaua mai I runga, tūtaua mai I raro, tūtaua mai I roto, tūtaua mai I waho, kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa. Haumie, hui tā iki e. Well, kia ora everyone. Welcome to the fourth Evidence to Practice session. Ko Cheryl Han tōku ingoa, he Pākehā aho. I'm with the Te Aotearoa Business Unit. Really happy to be here again as a facilitator. Before we get started, just a couple of messages. I know some of you have heard this before, but for the new people, in this version of Teams, you will see the presenters, but you won't see the participants. You can't use the chat, but you can use the Q&A function. So we're going to ask you to please add your questions that you want to be put to the presenters in that Q&A, and you'll see them coming up. With today's session, we're really pleased to welcome the team from MSD and from Verian. And Kathryn, Teresa and Brian are going to talk through the themes from their research, which is related to men in Aotearoa New Zealand who are currently or formerly use violence, and looking at the environments and the conditions that support or hinder men's change. And so then you're going to have a chance to ask some questions, and that'll be facilitated by Heath Hutton, who's the National System Practice Lead here at the Te Aotearoa Business Unit. So the Q&A is public. People online will see it. We just want to remind people that we want this to be a safe and inclusive space. We're going to cover topics of sexual violence and family violence in our discussion today. They can be difficult or distressing. So please do what you need to do to look after yourself and to keep yourself safe. We're going to, or we've already put up the links to the help portals for family violence and sexual violence. So please phone or online chat or get in touch with them if you need more information about help that's available. So now I'm going to introduce the presenters today. We've got Kathryn Robinson, who's the director at Verian Research, formerly Colmar Brunton and Kantar Public. She's been working with the Safer Communities team at MSD for the last 4 years around the research for the Campaign for Action on Family Violence and the Love Better initiatives. And prior to working at Verian, Kathryn was a communications strategist working in the public sector on behaviour change campaigns. We've also got Teresa Pomeroy, or TP, as many people know her, who leads the MSD's social action team, and they've been delivering prevention initiatives that contribute to the National Family and Sexual Violence Strategy. She's been working on prevention and social marketing initiatives across social development and the health sectors, and mental health, addictions, family violence, accessibility and disabled people's rights for many years. And also Brian Gardner from the MSD's social action team. He's been involved in men's behaviour change and family violence prevention for over 30 years, firstly in men's stopping violence programs, and then supporting men's change as the tauiwi manager for Te Kupinga Whakauti Mahi Pātunga, the National Network of Family Violence Services, and at the Office of the Children's Commissioner. So I'm really pleased to hand over to you three. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you for those lovely introductions. Now, I'm sharing my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that. Are we all good? All right. So TP, Brian, and I and the rest of the team have been on a bit of a journey over the last few years, and it's a journey which is about men's journeys and men's journeys of change. And so we're going to take a little bit of time for you today to talk you through very briefly some of the things that we have learnt from this research amongst current and former users of violence. So before we get into some of the research findings, let's just put this in a bit of context in terms of what this initiative is about. So we recognise that in this country we have a problem with family violence, and Change is Possible is one of the initiatives that seeks to be a solution to that problem. So Change is Possible is an initiative that is aiming to mobilize men so that we have more men who are using violence, that they become safe and they stop using violence, and that we are creating supportive environment for that change to happen. So eventually we move towards this goal of a safer Aotearoa New Zealand where more men are violence free. So that's the goal of Change is Possible, and I think it was almost in a way best put by one of the change makers that's been involved with the campaign for action on family violence for some time, that Vic Tamati. And Vic says, if there are no perpetrators, there will be no victims. So this focus on men and men's journeys is actually critical to helping make sure that our individuals, our whānaus and our communities are safer. However, along this journey, we recognise there is quite a gap in our understanding of men who are on a journey of change. This is a less well understood aspect of family violence, specifically the aspect around not what drives men's behaviours around abuse and violence, but what drives their willingness to change. So what we've been doing over the last 3 to 4 years is quite a broad set of research studies that you can kind of see here that seek to understand what is going on with men who are in or have been in violent and abusive relationships, and what we can understand about them that might encourage them to address their behaviours and to start a journey of change. So overall, we've talked to over 200 men. We have focused as much as we can on men who have not been mandated to address their behaviours and or who haven't received formal support for their behaviours. So we're really trying to shed some light on, if you like, that unknown cohort of men before they engage with formal support services, where they're at, where their heads are at, and how we can reach out to them to change. In doing so, we need to make some acknowledgements. So first of all, we need to acknowledge the men themselves that have been involved in these studies. The fact that they opened up and they contributed their stories and their perspectives and they trusted with those is not something that we take lightly. In many, many cases, this was the first time that they had actually talked about some of the issues that were going on with them. And issues that had lay in their past. And as you can see there from the quote on the right hand side, this was, you know, a significant event for many of these men in their lives. But in doing so, we must acknowledge the harm that has been inflicted by some of the men that we have talked with, and the impact that it has had upon those surrounding them. And like I say, you know, we hold the position of the people who have been harmed by their behaviours very strongly in our minds, because in the end, what we are doing here is we are trying to comprehend the men that have these behaviours whilst not condoning their actions. So in many ways, this is research for the victims as much as the perpetrators of these behaviours. So there is a lot that we have learned about calling men into a journey of change, and this is a very complex and a very nuanced space. But what we're just going to give you here today is a very shortened version of what we have learned on our own journey. So the first place to start, and it's quite a bold statement to say this is what doesn't work, but generally speaking, what we have observed time and time again is that tactics of calling out these men on their behaviour is something that is simply not motivating for them to seek to address that behaviour. So that focus on the individual, focusing on the acts that they're doing, focusing and using an outside view of their behaviours, using typecasting, using judgment, are the sorts of things that, in essence, men can detect these things a mile off and they won't have a bar of it. And a lot of this is because it starts to trigger a sense of shame in these men, which is very, very substantive barrier to starting a journey of change. And men will move away from the shame almost as quickly as they can. So anything that activates that sense of shame lands in a very difficult space with these men. And so, as you can see from some of the quotes there on the right hand side, you know, a sort of simplistic view, presenting this in simplistic terms just doesn't work. You know, you don't wake up one day and decide it'll be fun to smash your bloody missus. They're absolutely afraid of judgment and being ostracized as a result of their behaviors. They know that, or they believe that people will judge them quickly and that will become known and people will ostracize them. And then that last point there around shame and about this sense of the behaviors that they have are so shameful. It's one of the most difficult things to talk about. By contrast to that, the tactics around calling in seem to land much, much better with these men. And those tactics are things like, for example, emphasizing belonging. So instead of talking about the individual, presenting the individual as giving them a sense of belonging, giving them a sense of we or us or doing these sorts of things together. Focusing more on the context rather than in as much as their acts. So these guys have very difficult, very complex lives, and often they point to those lives as being the source of their problems and the source of their behaviours, and use that to explain their behaviours. And simply acknowledging sometimes that context is enough to start getting these guys on board. Connecting in with these guys' inner voice, what they are saying to themselves, as opposed to using that kind of outside view, seems to bring this kind of sense of understanding that these men are seeking. Focusing also on the future intent, where they want to be rather than where they are currently now within their behavior, also seems to be that something that these guys are looking for, and bringing a nuance to that kind of story instead of simply typecasting them. And then, you know, in a sense, a lot of this comes down to actually feeling that these guys are being listened to, that there is a sense of their voices of being heard. This is not the same as absolving their behaviour, but it is the same of understanding their point of view. And I think in some ways that can be quite an opening for some men to be able to move forward on that journey of change. And then lastly, you'll see in there, you know, the mention of the word safety, and it's not without irony that we talk about safety in the context of these men, but they see a journey of change as something which requires such a degree of vulnerability and risk that they need to be assured of their safety, both psychological, to some extent physical safety, before they will move forward with that. So going a little bit deeper into actually these change journeys and kind of what makes them happen, we're using a model here, very well known model, the COM-B model. I'm sure that people have heard from, and you know, we need to acknowledge that men's journeys of change and men and individuals are all very diverse and very different. But what this model tries to seek to do is to find some commonalities between the stories and journeys that we've heard. The model basically says that, you know, there are three conditions which need to be present in order for behaviour to happen. If that behaviour is a change journey, we need to look at men's motivation, we need to understand their opportunity, and we need to understand their capability of doing so. So I'm just going to quickly go through each of those things. So firstly, in terms of motivation, so we heard a lot of stories from of men, of their change journey, And often what we observed was, first of all, a sense of they were frankly not in a good place in their lives, and that desire to have a better life than the one that they were living forms, if you like, the bedrock of motivation. On top of that, we often observed this sense of a moment of crisis, or a rock bottom moment in their own words, which kind of precipitated them into action, a kind of a realization that the dissatisfactions of their lives could be something that they could no longer ignore. And then lastly, on top of that, we also got this sense of they started to have an inkling of a desire for personal growth. So a sense of whether they could go and something that they could kind of work towards. And so normally it seemed to take almost all of these three things kind of coming together, the life dissatisfaction, the moment of crisis, and this sense of a better life, a sense of personal growth coming through to really form a strong foundation for motivation. On the other hand, you know, one thing that we kind of have to acknowledge really is that actually the impact that they were having on their partner was not front of mind in terms of the motivations that we heard from the men that we have engaged in these kind of studies. And the other thing is that these motivations can be quite fleeting and they can be quite fluctuating. Quite often the circumstances that have precipitated that moment, the rock bottom event, can pass, or time can elapse, and the criticality of that moment can then pass, and they just tend to go back to accepting their circumstances and their behaviour as it is. Moving on now to the kind of the opportunity. So we have this motivation, which might be latent kind of motivation. And what we heard quite frequently was this sense of what we termed a moment of grace. And that is a moment where this man, who is probably at his most bittered and most resentful, encounters something, or quite often someone, that treats them with humanity and kindness and sees them as more than the sum of their poor behaviours. So we heard about these moments, which could be as simple as someone taking someone out and buying them a cup of coffee, where these men suddenly had this sense that there could be something which is out there for them, and there could be people who could actually help them on that journey. So as I say, these can be quite small and may look quite insignificant to the person doing it, but they can have quite a disproportionate effect upon the man who is receiving it. The other thing, and connecting in with that desire for growth that I mentioned earlier, is also this sense of something coming to them which is about building their strength or building their skills, giving them something that they can kind of work towards. So often when these opportunities come up, these men might gravitate towards them because they begin to get this sense of growth that can come through, and that if they actually kind of work on themselves. The counterpart to all this is these moments of opportunity seem to be things which are currently sort of stumbled into rather than actively sought out, which is of course why we need the things like the campaigns around Change Is Possible, because the more that we can have visibility and presence of the help which is there, we can move away from something which is essentially quite sporadically happening to something which might be more easily accessed by these men in these kind of moments of need themselves. And then lastly, just moving on to the capability. So capability, there's obviously the capability in terms of the things that these men want, and that really depends upon what they're looking for, and their needs can be quite diverse from what they are looking to seek to achieve, or what they are looking to seek to change. But, you know, some people like group work, some people like individuals, some people like in person, some people like online, some people are dealing with trauma, other people are dealing with different things. So there is a sense of, there isn't one size fits all. It's a bit like starting an exercise program. There is not one way of doing it. There are different things which are required according to different needs and circumstances. However, what is always needed is trust. And that often comes through from that sense of no judgment, a sense of welcoming, a sense of belonging, and quite often belonging to a group of men that they can relate to can be quite a strong way of building trust. And often within this, the facilitator of a program, if there is a program that they're looking towards, is absolutely key. Someone that they believe is authentic, who is there for the right reasons, is something which is actually of predominant importance because of all these fears of judgment and ostracizing and all these things that I talked about earlier. And then lastly, there's a sense of psychological capability that comes into here. Quite often these guys, they don't have much extensive life experiences beyond what they know. They don't have many role models. So quite often don't even have a sense that men like them can actually change. And so that the belief that change is possible is something that is required. And time again, we see the stories of men that have been on a change journey having a disproportionate impact upon men who are in similar circumstances before they have started their change journey. They look to them, they get a sense of this is possible, this is welcomed, and I'm going to be a better man as a result of it. However, you know, one of the things that we need to really be aware of is we're asking these men to hope that they can create change. And actually, that's quite difficult to know and believe in if they don't know how that change is going to happen. So lifting the lid on what goes on during a change journey, what it actually involves, some of the people that they meet, some of the things that they might be doing, it's actually really impossible. Is really important, because otherwise it's almost impossible to step into a journey of change without knowing and trusting what that journey is actually going to entail. And then just the last kind of point on here is, you know, I've talked here a lot about the individual and how the individual experiences that journey of change, but it is the environment and the context that surrounds them that really is the catalyst for those journeys to happen. That change at an individual level is hard, particularly if you don't have people around you who support you or role models that you can follow. But where there is community and societal support for these change, it can make all the difference to men. And that's why, as part of this, the wider campaign around Change is Possible, there is emphasis there on mobilizing influencers and communities to promote healthy masculinities and what this actually looks like. And that is an essential part of actually solving this problem. So I'm just going to pass you over to TP and Brian, just to give you a little sense of what that looks like for the Change is Possible campaign.
Thanks, Kathryn.
Thanks, Kathryn, and thanks, Cheryl and the Te Puna Aonui team for the opportunity to share some of our insights and our work with you today. I'm just going to talk briefly about the whole of the Change is Possible campaign, and then I'm going to talk to the content and channels work, and Brian will talk to community mobilisation. But just at a high level, I'm not sure if everyone is aware that Change is Possible is actually phase 4 of the campaign for action on family violence. And we've got a narrower focus now, which is on mobilising change in men using violence or at risk of using violence through both talking to men directly and the people that can influence them, and through helping to build the communities that support men's behaviour change. Just some of the things I really want to share with you. So this phase of the campaign, we've made a move from how we do this work. So we're moving from growing awareness and focusing on attitudes as a way to get behaviour change, to a much stronger focus on norms and on influence and disruption. It's really critical that we position this work within the wider ecosystem that supports men on behaviour change journeys. And so as part of that, we have very intentionally chosen not to be brand driven for this phase. So Change is Possible is more of what we've been calling a kaupapa brand, something that people can kind of form coalitions around that supports a whole lot of our community partners. So we're not competing with all of that work that is driven both from the ground up and from communities and by those agencies that need to engage men for more therapeutic support. And so we've got two key strategic responses. One is change journeys, and that's the one that's focused more in the campaign and content and channel space, and one which is focused on change makers. And so I'm just going to talk very quickly to change journeys. So this is the advertising kind of component of the campaign. And our strategy really from this point on is to have a whole range of campaigns and content that can talk to men throughout the stages of their journey. So we're starting at the moment with change-ready men, and the purpose of that is to call them in to engage with formal services. We've got a real focus on addressing those barriers for men. Why don't they engage help now? I mean, there are different types of stats, and you'll know more, Brian, around how many men actually seek formal help, so between 10, 12, 15%. But where possible, we really want to engage men to address those barriers. So and we know those barriers are shame, relevance, is what I'm doing that, and trust, including trust of services. So Kathryn mentioned, lifting the hood. As part of that ecosystem, it's really important that the campaigns are integrated with the other parts. So we are now working with the help portal team that looks after the phone lines and the digital platforms, and the website that was known as In Your Hands, and we're going to shift that to Change Is Possible, will be really integrated with our campaigns. So we're, as much as possible, a really seamless kind of pathway for men through campaign and content platforms that can help them identify behaviours and seek help, and ultimately working directly with our community partners. So, part of that lifting the hood is introducing community partners, even through regional campaigns, to men. So just with the time, that's probably all I'll say there. Really happy to answer questions later. But I'll head over to Brian, who's going to talk about our community mobilisation responses.
Kia ora TP, kia ora koutou everybody. Thank you Cheryl and team for the opportunity to talk about the work that we're doing around men's change. Something that we've been really digging deep on to understand and see how we make a difference. The stuff that I want to talk about is community mobilisation. I'm a bit of an unusual fish in that I've sat in groups as a man who's used abusive behaviour and violence as a young man and needed to make changes, and I've also run group programs and was lucky enough to be involved in the early stages of the It's Not Okay campaign as one of the guys speaking out about abuse and violence. So what we're doing is while we're doing the campaigns work, what we know is that we need to have people in community that are actually supporting that shift and supporting healthy masculinity and modelling what that looks like. Well, we've got a lot of excellent community programs that are working with men and delivering group programs with men. What we knew we needed was everyday citizens. The research is really clear that actually most men don't agree with men's violence to women, and there are actually ordinary everyday people out there, men who are working for change in their community. So what we wanted to do was see how we could harness that and how we could support some of those men to be working in their communities. We're doing we had small grants for those groups, and we had our Changemaker Fund. And I think all up, we've funded over more than 60 citizen-led projects in the community. And it's everything from working in barbershops where they're coming in contact with men all the time and talking to men about relationships and well-being, people doing videos around men's change, people running men's groups and men's programs, people doing waka ama and sporting activities and those kind of things. And really what we knew that we needed opportunities to call men in. And when men are in relationship, you can have those straight conversations. But if men don't step through the door, you're not having those conversations at all. So we've got the change makers around the community. We've had our Changemaker Fund, and we've developed partnerships with both community programs and within government to look at how we shift that change. As TP said, we're doing behind the scenes work, really. We're wanting to backbone stuff because we have a whole lot of initiatives that are happening out there. And if those initiatives have been seen to be driving it, and there's a multiplicity of those, then actually that will make more impact around that. What we know, and I talked about, is we need a layers of response. We need that what I call the formal response. So that might be group programs. We need the informal response. So that's the Matt Browns of the world that lots of people know, but it's the guys up in Otaki running their men's group. It's the barbers in South Auckland who are doing their work. So we're capturing at men at a whole range of points. Those men are modelling healthy masculinity. They're challenging those things around abusive behaviours and harm, and they're actually looking at often some really simple strategies that men can use to regulate their behaviour, and also knowing how to support men into change. One of the things that we've developed is an online forum. That's a new initiative for us, where we're calling our change makers together in a safe space so we can build their capability, build their critical consciousness, and they can share with each other the activities they're doing. And what we're hoping to do in the third stage of that is to amplify that out so we can make that even bigger. What we need, I was going to say hundreds, but what we need is thousands of change makers in the community supporting that change and making it real. So yeah, that's the work that we're doing. It takes a while to kind of make that change happen, but always really excited at the opportunity to do that. And there may well be people out there on this call who are change makers, so I encourage you to get in touch with us and have a talk to us about the work that you're doing and how you can connect with that.
We've got some funding.
Some funding. There'll be a flood. Kia ora, everybody.
So that's it from us. So now over to questions.
Kia ora, Kathryn, Brian and Teresa. That was really nice introduction to the content today. And just a little bit about me. Ko Heath Hutton toku ingoa. I'm a National System Practice Lead at Te Puna Aonui Business Unit. And I come to this conversation from a background of behaviour change with men and adolescents in the area of harmful sexual behaviour and sexual violence. So it's really interesting to hear these insights that you've gathered from your work. And yeah, thanks for sharing those today. We've had some questions through the question and answer area, and I encourage those on the call to keep those coming. We've got some time to keep asking those questions over the next 25 minutes or so. So if you've got a burning question, please chuck that in the chat and we'll try to get to that. One of I guess the question that comes up in this space often is how do we invite men into change when you kind of need that rapport and connection and calling men in, whilst also balancing the need to kind of have accountability, think of the safety of victims, for the men to take responsibility for the harm that they've caused. How do we balance those tensions in this?
Kia ora, Heath. I think that's a really good question, and I think often what we fall back on, and certainly in New Zealand, is actually often people are distressed and angry about the behaviour that's happened, and I can really understand that. And often we want to tell people off, and we want them to change their behaviour. But what we know is if we're not I know how I respond when people come at me and accuse me, and I know how lots of other people respond around change when they're being challenged in a way that's unhelpful, whether that's your doctor saying you need to lose weight, you need to give up smoking, or whether as a man you need to change your behaviour and be safe in your relationships. So what we're knowing around this stuff is actually you need to be able to, like we said, you need to be able to call men in. You need to be able to engage men. You need to model different healthy masculinity inside relationship. But actually, the men that we're talking about, those change-ready men, actually they are looking for change. So actually they're not looking for someone to reinforce the negative things they're doing, the hurtful things they're doing. They're actually looking for someone to have a conversation with them about what does the how look like. I think if all we do is repeat their story and reinforce their story, actually we leave men stuck. So how do we invite men in? How do we build connection? How do we have real conversations that both acknowledge the struggle that they're doing and the harm that they're causing, and how do we stay with them for however long they need and be there when they need it? So for me, those are the key elements to that. It's like I'm saying, I don't know how many successful change processes have started with people getting a sound telling off. Often the guys we're talking about, they've had a childhood full of that stuff. Yeah.
Thanks, Brian. Any other thoughts from you, Kathryn or Teresa, on that?
No, I mean it's attention, the calling in and holding accountability. And so, I mean, one of the processes we use with the campaign stuff is, we've worked with like the National Collective of Women's Refugees, in particular Ange and Deb McKenzie from Backbone, and we're meeting them again next week, just to make sure that critical voice is there, that we're not unintentionally victim blaming or minimizing or shaming victims. So it's just a space we have to hold with care, but also courage.
One of my concerns, Heath, is for a lot of this work is being done by women to support women who are on the end of men's violence. So really what we're wanting to do is actually create more spaces where we're calling men into that conversation. So actually then they become the change makers to support that change.
I guess in a kind of related sense, at a societal level, I'm wondering about your thoughts about how do we kind of increase the visibility of these kind of approaches, calling men in, whilst also kind of shifting the norms in terms of attitudes and behaviours around violence, more generally across at a societal level.
Oh, I can say something.
You've got the sweet spot for TP there.
No, I the more I do this kind of work, like norms will trump personal attitudes every time. And I think it's really, really easy for all of us to think that if we just give people information or challenge their personal attitudes, that change will occur. Like when we're with Kathryn and with our other researchers, so IHI Research and Development, Point and Associates, Awa, we've done, and working alongside the fabulous Christy Trewalter, who's helped us with our outcomes framework and doing some sense making around all of our evidence, and we're happy to share that with everybody too. That I think it's easy to forget, just particularly around the areas we're interested in, around gender norms and social norms, around men as stoic and vulnerable, men as dominant over women, and kind of all aspects of civic life. And the nature of men's relationships with each other and how they can reinforce or loosen up some of those things. In many of our communities, those are still really strong. And for many men, there's a cost to not adhering to those. And I think if we don't understand that, then a lot of our messages will just fall into a vacuum. So what we've learned through working with Safe Man, Safe Family over a number of years now, through partnering with Matt Brown and Sarah Brown and My Father's Barbara and Shares on Represent, when we can support men who not only role model what it looks like to disrupt those norms, they give permission to other men to do it. They role model what it looks like to have alternative narratives and discourses. So I think one of the successful ways that we've learned around that, which is why we're now investing in more and more change makers, is that, it's what I said at the beginning, it's moving away from sort of centre out messaging and moving more to sort of influence and disruption. Does that make sense? Yeah,
I think it does. Yeah,
I hope so.
I mean, it's difficult to kind of convey the complexity of this issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
In a kind of short presentation, and I appreciate doing your best to try to communicate those. Yeah, it's really.
Well, I think one of the key things, Heath, is that it's messy. Like when you work in government and you're used to leading campaigns, there's a kind of easiness to doing it all and then sending it out and letting people use your messages. But actually understanding what influence and disruption in communities looks like like, and how to backbone kind of responses that support that without being in control of it. It's messy. And so one of the learnings for us is, how do we manage up around that? Like, how do we hold space for that and tell a narrative to kind of like senior management that where they understand it? And yeah, we've learnt some things around that too.
A question from the chat around under motivation. Kathryn, you commented on the impact on the partner not being front of mind, and the question was, did you ask about their views on the impacts on their children? We have had good engagement from men who did not want the same childhood for their children as they themselves had.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. We hear that quite frequently, that the impact on children can be that absolute motivating force. I think, the thing about that motivation, it's about, often it comes from something which is really important to that individual. So quite often we hear from these individuals, they do want to be good dads. They do recognize that they might not have had the best role models when it came to their own parents. So they're quite invested in being better fathers than their fathers were, but they also recognize that they don't possibly have the tools in order to be able to do that. We also hear things like, when people's jobs go at risk, or where their social standing is something which might be being called into question. So sometimes those motivations are things which are kind of deeply held as part of their personal values and identity. And when they realize that those things are at risk of their behaviors, that can be the impetus to change. But absolutely right, that impact upon children is a really frequent and really profound motivator that we've heard quite frequently.
I think one of the useful things for people to know, and sorry, there's a bit of a change going on. We've got a website called In Your Hands that's actually got some really some powerful stories on there from men who have made change, ordinary men who have made change, and a number of those stories talk about the impact on children and how men wanted to have a different experience for their kids than they did for them. So if you look at In Your Hands at the moment, that's the website as it exists at the moment, but actually that's going to become the Change is Possible website, and that's going to be part of our campaign work. But like Kathryn's saying, we know that's a big motivator for men. So there's stories and resources there around that support that motivation for change.
A kind of similar related question in terms of, I guess, thinking about intervention and intervention earlier. Does any of this work that you're doing connect and inform high schools or works in schools? A comment that this kind of work could be helpful for both men and women early on.
No, we do. I mean, in our wider team, has Zephyr and Cherie done a presentation on Love Better? So that's a really different approach for young people. And so in our team, there's the Love Better campaign, and that's around positive, equal and safe relationships. And so, and we can share Zephyr and Cherie's contacts if anyone wants to. So that's not high school based, but it's for young people. And I think it's being part of the ecosystem. So what's happening in high schools within the curriculum, what needs to happen for parents, what needs to happen within digital and social media and within the norm. So yeah, but I mean, Zephyr and Cherie have done an amazing job with Love Better.
Yep.
There's lots of learnings there that might be able to help answer that question.
Look, in the latest phase of the campaign, they've had two phases of that campaign. One in the Love Better, which was around, sort of healthy relationships and breaking up well, really. And the latest phase of that is called Love Creep, and that's actually looking at young people in relationships and controlling behaviours. Yeah. A really powerful campaign. I'd encourage people to jump on, have a look at Love Creep.
Love Better website.
Depending on what age you are, it might not have come across your world, but it may well have come across the world of the young people in your lives.
And Kathryn's also led the research and evaluation around that as well.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a really helpful kind of pointer to those campaigns, and I think some of the some of the themes around, I guess, calling people into realising their own behaviours, especially in that second phase of the project, has been, I think, really promising. And I understand that the Love Better campaign has had a huge influence on young people, huge engagement. So some really positive things in that space. A question just about a specific population, about having data or research on Pacific men specifically.
Oh, Kathryn, jump in here. But so we sit alongside our whānau and the Eche whānau team and the Pacifica Proud team as a whole of population team. We always try and do like a third Pacific, a third Māori, and a third whole of population. So we do have data. It's not through a kaupapa lens, but we're really happy to share that as well.
A question from overseas and an acknowledgement. Someone calling in from Wales, really inspired by the work you're doing.
Oh,
So
we love our friends in Wales.
Wales.
I guess, and I guess it is also relevant to our setting. That any tips on kind of how to get started with this work without necessarily heaps of government funding or heaps of government backing, which may or may not be relevant in the New Zealand arena as well.
Yeah, look, I think one of the things we can do is start finding out who are the people in our community who are doing this work, because often people do this work because it's hard work, and it's great to have some resourcing to support that, but there's a whole lot of people who are doing that anyway. So if you haven't got the resourcing, don't let that stop you. Find out who are your friends and partners and communities, what are the low cost, no cost things you can do and activities you can do to get the conversation started. I think that this work can be really challenging work, and sometimes you can feel a bit odd doing this stuff when you're fighting against kind of really strong social norms. Find your mates, gather together and think about what's the change we want to support and how might we start going about doing that work. And look, in the when I think about the now and the ability to be on social media, to use your iPhone to do messaging, to do all of those things, actually there's a whole lot of ways you can get messages out that actually we could never have done in the past, and actually we need to do now. When we started the It's Not Okay stuff, or TP and the team did, you get to 90% of people using television. Actually now people are all over the place. So think about those things like community networks, social media, activities you can, and partners you can hook onto to share your message. And lobby for resources.
And have good evidence.
From your government, from your new government.
But also I think with those, like, we relied really heavily on Australia for a lot of our strategic thinking, and we've been working with Victoria and with Michael Flood, and I really hope to connect with Wales too. But like, they've got huge resource now compared to New Zealand, but I think like just sharing, lots and lots of sharing.
What New Zealand does really well, and I think we can feel really proud of this, and in talking to the Aussies, they said, look, we've got plenty of resourcing, but actually what we're struggling to do is the on the ground stuff. We've got really great resources that are supporting our thinking, but I think in New Zealand, some of the things we do really well is we get things started and we just do stuff. With communities. Yeah, with communities. And especially there's some amazing stuff happening in all communities, but I think a lot of Māori and Pacific men have really stepped forward into that space around change and reclaiming that sense of who they are culturally, who they are as men and fathers, and how they want to do that differently. I suppose one of my challenges is to those guys like myself, the ones of Irish and Scottish whakapapa and those other kinds of things, are like, how do we step into our stories and tell our stories differently too? Because often our roots of that Western thinking of masculinity has often been the driver of a lot of that unhelpful stuff to ourselves and to other people. So yeah.
Thanks, Brian. We've only got a couple of minutes left, and there's been a flurry of questions in the chat. So I guess just an encouragement to all of those who I haven't got round to answering and asking those questions today. Please get in touch with Kathryn and Brian and Teresa. Their details will be sent out, and I guess you're just talking about different concepts of masculinity and the influence in New Zealand context. There was a question around how you ensured that there was Māori representation, both in terms of who you worked with and within the research team. Really relevant question in New Zealand at the moment. Any thoughts on that?
That's a really great question. One of the things that we've found across all our research is it takes two things to happen to do this successfully. One is to be talking with the right people, and the other one is to have the right people talking to them. So what we make sure, I don't do any of this research. I'm British, white British woman. You know, I'm not having these conversations one-on-one, but we work with people who have got experience of working with men on a journey of change, and they are drawn from our communities and cultures. So we have Māori, Pacifica, Pakeha researchers, because it's really important, if we are holding someone's story, we're going to take someone's story, that we do that in a way that has love and understanding at the heart of it. In terms of actually getting people on board with this research, I mean, a lot of it, we've got to say, you know, it's self-selected. So these are guys who are coming forward and they're putting their hands up and saying, yes, I want to be part of this. I want to share my story. And we do look to make sure that the spaces that we are creating for those stories are culturally safe and culturally appropriate, like, for example, having the right interviewers who are there. But the power of listening is something that always comes through with our research. We always think we're never going to get anyone to talk about this stuff, but by going out and saying to people, we want to understand your perspective, we want to understand what is happening to you, so we can use that to do some good in the world, essentially, not quite in those words. That is actually really powerful for people to join with, and particularly, you know, from that Māori and Pacifica perspective, who often feel like they have been marginalized from these sorts of design of services and kind of things like that, by saying, look, we are specifically trying to find and reach out to people like yourself so we can listen to it. So yeah, it's a journey for us as well, I have to say. You know, it's something that we need to we're kind of continually working on and through, but by making sure that we're getting the right people on the team who are reaching out and engaging with those guys, and the right sort of people who are coming forward and putting their hands up for those reasons which are important to them. That seems to make the magic happen. And my God, I mean, some of the conversations that we've had, which have gone for hours in some cases, have been very humbling, I have to say. Yeah.
And I'll just throw one little point in. Thanks, Kathryn. For anyone watching who's in government, just around procurement. So more recently, our team has been trying to be more intentionally focused, I mean, probably with a treaty lens actually, around how we procure research. So we're more recently, with a couple of our projects, we've invited collaborations. So there's a Kipapa Māori researcher and a whole of population researcher coming together. And that's been really successful. It took a bit of work at first because some procurement and government likes to have one lead provider, you know, but yeah, and again, if anyone wants to share, like wants us to share how we've managed to get that through after a long time, happy to share that as well.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, and yeah, so thank you so much for your thoughts, and I apologise to those that we didn't reach those questions, but please get in touch and we can continue this conversation. I'll hand it back to Cheryl to close us out. Thanks.
Thanks, Heath.
Thank you so much. It's always a great conversation. I'm so pleased we had the opportunity to share your research and insights. We've had quite a few questions about how can we access the research, the resources, hear more about the campaign. So we will talk with MSD, and we're going to add the video for this onto our website and on our YouTube channel, and we will get some of the evidence summary and the slides as well. We'll add that on and get in touch with us through the relationships at punaonui.govt.nz through that email, and then we can connect you in with the MSD crew. We hope that you found this useful. Give us your ideas for other sessions, and you can just get in touch through that relationships email and get on our invite list, and also get the pānui that comes out from Te Puna Aonui as well. We're going to be back next year, so look out for that invite. And I really just wanted to say before we finish, I love what you said, Brian, about how to get started. Find the people in your community, support them, because we know that breaking the silence and having those community conversations is the first way to start this work around preventing violence. So yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to close with karakia. Kia tau te rangi maari e ki runga i ngā iwi Aotearoa. Homie, huie, tai kie. Sending peace out to everybody across the world. Thanks, everyone. Take care.